Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of y'all heard me. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Dan. My name is Asila Sharif, and I have the pleasure of serving as CARIMU's Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. On behalf of our President and CEO and our Board of Directors, we welcome you into CARIMU House, the nation's oldest Black producing theater celebrating 110 years of excellence. We celebrate that as well. So CARIMU's mission is to produce professional theater, provide arts education, and present community programs for all people while honoring the Black experience. That means that everyone is welcome in this house. Now, throughout its years, CARIMU has been known as a convener for meaningful and important conversations. CARIMU is a Swahili word that means a place of joyful gathering in the center of the community. Now, we frequently work with partners, organizations, businesses to use the performing arts to lift up the conversations and amplify the issues around the conversations they need to have with stakeholders, not unlike what you're doing today. We invite you to stay engaged, get engaged, as we continue to preserve this legacy for the next 100 years. We are honored to host today's mayor-to-mayor discussion. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, Congresswoman Shontel Brown. Congresswoman Brown has proudly served the people of Northeast Ohio for more than a decade. Born and raised Clevelander, she is dedicated to helping the people of Ohio thrive. Please welcome to the stage, Congresswoman Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Asila, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone at CARIMU House for opening your doors to all of us today. And it is especially meaningful to gather here at CARIMU House as we kick off this conversation about Cleveland's future. As the nation's oldest producing Black theater, CARIMU has been a beacon of culture, creativity, and community in this city since 1915. It also holds a special place in my heart because one of my very first votes in Congress was for a bill that included $500,000 in federal funding to help support the rehabilitation and revitalization of this historic space. Paired with the support from Cleveland City Council and the Mandel Foundation and many other local partners, that funding helped to bring this theater back to the life and ensure that it remains a place of community and storytelling for years to come. Standing here today in this beautiful theater is a reminder that when federal and local partners work together, we can invest in our community and get things done. And in that spirit of partnership, it's exactly what today's conversation is all about. Before coming to Congress, I served in local government, and that experience stays with you. Local government is where the impact is most immediate. If a street light goes out, if a road needs fixing, if a neighborhood is behind on trash collection, people don't call Washington, thank God. They call the city hall, or they find you in the grocery store, and let me tell you, they still find me in the grocery store. But that is why I've been proud to build a strong working partnership with our great Mayor Justin Bibb. He and I both understand that Cleveland moves forward when local and federal leaders are working hand in hand. At a time when national politics are divisive and tend to dominate the headline, there is progress, real progress happening here at the local level. Mayor Bibb knows that to be a good mayor, you must not only execute on the basics, but also chart a vision. So he set out to improve public safety, to modernize services at City Hall, to make housing more affordable, affordable, and to launch economic development projects from core to shore. And as he pushes those efforts forward, it helps those of us in Washington see more clearly where federal policy needs to change or where federal resources can be better supported by the work that's happening on the ground. Probably the best example of this is the infrastructure law. When I voted for it in Congress, we knew it would bring historic investments in roads, bridges, transit, and clean energy. But just as important, it gave cities like Cleveland certainty and the ability to plan big, to compete for grants, and to move projects forward knowing the resources were finally there. Mayor Bibb and his team took that opportunity seriously. They built a plan to put those investments to work, redeveloping our lakefront, driving a generational update to our airport, reconnecting local neighborhoods, and laying the groundwork for the next chapter of Cleveland's growth. And our special guest today understands this dynamic as well as anyone. Pete Buttigieg knows what it means to lead a city as the former mayor of South Bend, and he knows what it takes to translate federal investment into real projects as the former Secretary of Transportation. So today's conversation, Build the Cleveland Era, is really about that intersection, the power of local leadership and the importance of strong federal partnerships in helping cities succeed. Because conversations like the one we're about to hear truly matter. Cleveland, like many Midwestern cities, is too often counted out or overlooked. But we know something different is happening here. We are on the cusp of a new era, one defined by new opportunities, new investments, and renewed confidence in our city's future. Cleveland has always had the talent, the grit, and the vision. What is new is the leadership and the intention to invest in Cleveland's future. So the next generation inherits not just our history, but the tools to build a thriving and competitive city. And in many ways, that's what Karamu House represents. So as I come to a close, like this theater, Cleveland has deep roots. Like this theater, it has faced challenges and reinvention. And like this theater, it is proving with the right investment, the right leadership, and the right community behind it, the next act can be even stronger than the last. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Justin Bibb and Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One more time for our amazing Congresswoman. As we see all the chaos and craziness going on in Washington, D.C., I thank God every day that we have a Congresswoman in Shontel Brown that gets up every single day to fight for Cleveland and our residents. Thank you, Congressman, for your leadership. We appreciate it. Also want to thank Asila and the entire team at Karamu for hosting this important conversation. We wanted to pick this theater and pick Karamu for a special reason, because in many ways, this theater and this part of our city represents resilience in so many ways, particularly as the oldest black theater in this country. And as we reflect on Cleveland's story, our story has always been about the power of resilience. And that's what the Cleveland era is all about in this moment. Now, for a long time, Cleveland has been defined as a Rust Belt city, one that's been plagued by stagnation, declining population loss, and many questions doubting whether or not a legacy American city can rebuild itself in hard times. But I think we've proven over the last 4 years that Cleveland can build in hard times, and Cleveland's comeback is here right now. Right now. But that comeback requires having strong partners in Washington to support America's cities and to support the Midwest. And we were grateful in my first term to have someone who believes not only in the Midwest, but believes in Cleveland's importance to this country, and that is my friend, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Now, when we reflect on all the great progress that we've made over the last 4 years, it's because we had leaders like Congresswoman Shontel Brown and Secretary Buttigieg who always thought that for America to achieve its potential, we need to invest in cities now more than ever. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, my friend, Pete Buttigieg. Pete.
Thanks very much, Mayor Bibb, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm honored to be here in the Karamu Theater, knowing the significance that it has in Cleveland's history, in Black history, in American history, and delighted to be with Congresswoman Shontel Brown once again, someone we worked with closely to deliver results and dollars for this region. I had the formative experience in my public service career as a mayor in the community of South Bend, Indiana, 3 or 4 hours due, whichever way is west of here, right up I-80. And ours was a community that had an industrial heyday in the past and struggles ever since. By the time I became mayor, our per capita income hovered around $18,000 per person. We'd lost about a quarter of our population. There were whole blocks of our city that had more vacant houses than houses in them. But I was part of a generation that refused to take that for an answer, that insisted on having a city future that was better and different than our past. And that's something that's on my mind, not just as I'm here witnessing the extraordinary comeback that the mayor, together with community leaders, has led here in Cleveland, but as I think about where our country is headed to. We are in a moment where it would be tempting to look back to the way things were a few years ago, because things today in America, in my view, are much worse than they were a few years ago. But I think it is critically important that we resist the temptation to imagine that our task is to simply stop damage that is taking place now, find all the pieces of everything that just got broken, tape it all together, and serve up the world as it looked in 2023 or 2013. I believe our job is to imagine something better, not just better than today, but better than before. And in that sense, I think that America has a lot to learn from the cities of the industrial Midwest, cities that we were proud to invest in during my time in the administration, and cities that have, though not waited for salvation to come from Washington. And with everything going on in Washington right now, I actually believe that for our country, our political and policy salvation will come from the local. I think this is a great place to talk about that in detail, and so I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for having me.
So Pete, welcome back to Cleveland.
Thank you. Good to be back.
A snowstorm deferred our big plans in January.
That's right. Congratulations on the second term, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks to the voters for that. Mr. Secretary, I know you've been traveling the country a lot over the last several months. What are you learning from across the country, and what lessons do you have for us as we navigate these challenging times right now in America?
Well, what I see is a sort of a split screen. On one hand, we see conditions in the country that are becoming more and more painful. The concerns that prevailed in our economy a year or 2 or 3 years ago about affordability have become that much more acute now. Energy prices, electricity prices getting higher, even as projects for transmission and generation of clean energy are being stopped by Washington. The cost of groceries getting higher, largely compounded by what's going on with tariffs. The cost of housing getting higher. You know, it wasn't that long ago that the median age of a first-time home buyer was in the 20s. Now it's 40. And many people, young people I talk to, don't even think that they'll ever be able to afford a home, which is so central to how people imagine the American dream. And I could go on and on, but we know that the economic pressure that we're under. And of course, we're witnessing things on the streets of American cities that this isn't a left-right thing that anybody from any political stripe ought to recognize have no place in the United States of America or in any freedom-loving country. I am taken back to memories of conversations, friendly arguments I would have with conservative friends over beers when I was a student, where they were the ones invoking the image of federal agents marching down the streets of American cities in a way that I thought was kind of outlandish, only for it now to be happening. So I see all of that. And on the other hand, I see so many places where people are determined to build a better future for themselves, to take all of the resources that they can find, federal, local, community, and solve the problems that are in front of them without waiting for Washington. And I'm especially moved when I see places that are looking at what's already around them in a new way. That includes civic resources, includes natural resources. One of the best things to happen to the city where I served as mayor is when the city began to turn and face its river. And I see in the way that you're talking about the two waterfronts of this city, something similar going on in Cleveland. So whether I'm in Alabama, as I was last weekend, or Pennsylvania, as I was the week before, or here in Ohio, the thing that gives me the most hope is seeing how people are taking action to solve problems, looking to each other rather than expecting anybody in Washington is going to save them. I just miss the days when we were there to bring some tools from Washington to at least try to be a wind at your back as you're trying to solve those problems.
Well, I have to say, first, thank you for the $130 million to help transform our lake fund. We truly appreciate it. We were talking backstage with the Congresswoman about how we go forward as a nation, and what do we need from our federal government as we emerge out of this moment of chaos and cruelty in America right now. And you said something very important, that if we begin to talk about let's go back to the way things were, that's a trap.
Yep.
And I agree with you. So if you could draw a blank canvas, what would you take from your time being a mayor, and how that would inform how you would build anew as we plot a new future and a new vision for the nation?
Well, I think that's exactly the mode we need to be thinking in. If our political and social and economic systems were serving us well over the last few decades, we wouldn't be in this situation, right? So all of that is what led to all of this. Now we need to imagine things from scratch. In some cases, if only because what's there has been burned down. So I think back, both as mayor and as secretary, to the moments we were trying to get something done, but the way things were, or that phrase that I know every enterprising mayor dreads hearing, which is we've always done it this way, right? Every time that phrase gets thrown at you, what are the things we wish we could take apart and put back together on totally new terms? What does that actually look like? Well, we got to make it easier to build things. We did a great job funding things, but as you know, and project sponsors around the country know better than anyone, actually turning those funds into results means tearing down some of the red tape, the obstacles, the hoops, especially when it comes to federal money. And I know that you're living this not just with transportation dollars, but when it comes to housing, when it comes to the requirements associated with various funds to try to drive housing affordability. We know it's an issue with energy at a time when we really need to rethink how energy moves around this country. So that's one set of things. The other thing I think a lot about is the capacity of the federal government to help with various issues that people are facing on the ground. I would actually argue that the federal government needs both more capacity and less capacity. I would like for it to have less capacity when it comes to the mass surveillance of American citizens, or anybody else for that matter, on American soil. I would like to see less capacity for intimidation. At the same time, while so much more capacity has been built up for surveillance and intimidation, we have lost capacity for dealing with things like inequality, or standing up for people whose freedom is being constrained by a bigger entity like a corporation, whether it's the corporation you work for as a worker or one that you are dealing with. And so I think we need to build institutions that can hold anything big, whether it's a large corporation or the government itself, to account, while making it easier for people solving things on the ground up to pursue the solutions that they know work.
You know, you wrote a book about trust, which I have on my nightstand, by the way. And a lot about what you talked about requires trust. And you know this very well as a former mayor. You know, in this job, it's part fixing the pothole, or this week, the big sinkhole.
I saw that.
I don't know if my director of public utilities is here, Marty Kane, but we're trying to get that thing fixed in a month, by the way, Marty. So putting you on blast a little bit, Marty.
We heard it here.
So it's part pothole, but also part vision,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of that depends on our ability to build trust with the residents that we are blessed to serve every single day. But I would tell you, poll after poll after poll shows us that Americans don't trust politicians. Americans don't trust government. And in our political party, we have lost credibility with the American people.
Yep.
From your standpoint, what can the Democratic Party, but what can the nation learn from common sense, pragmatic mayors to rebuild that trust, to help rebuild America?
Well, I think mayors live in a world of the real. You know, as you know, if there's a hole in the road, you don't get to say, that's fake news, it's the best road ever.
No.
There's no holes in it.
No.
Right?
No.
You don't get to, because people know.
No, they know. They tell me too.
And they will find a way to let you know.
Yes.
So whether it's trash or snow or potholes or economic development or safety, you're living in this world where, of course, there's still rumor and there's still misinformation in the world of the local, but people are much more likely to have a sense from their own observations of what's going on. That's one of the reasons I think the best place to build trust is closer to home. A second observation I'd have is that one of the best ways to earn trust is through results. And when people, even if they're yelling at you the whole time, when people see that a community is getting to be a better place to live, when they feel that it's a better place to be, you are rewarded for that, politically, but not only politically. And you get a little more, you know, when you earn a second term, for example, you have a little more room for maneuver to take even bigger swings. Although you were taking some pretty big swings in the first term.
So I was.
And of course, the really rewarding experience of seeing those things through, because they take time, right? Sometimes it's something you launch in your first year could be taking until your fifth or beyond to actually deliver. The third thing I would mention is that we need in this country to find and cultivate more overlapping circles of belonging. And what I mean by that is that the circles we belong to can either be overlapping or they can be concentric. A lot of our circles are concentric. If I know your workplace, your education, your faith community, a couple other things about you, probably can guess what your politics are going to be. So each one of those circles sits inside another one of those circles. But we also have overlapping circles that many of us belong to. Maybe it is a faith community. Maybe it's a sports loyalty that definitely brings people with different circles in terms of their political identity, different racial or economic or social backgrounds, but they have that in common. And then that overlaps with a neighborhood, which brings different kinds of people together. Offline, in real life, in 3D, not coming to you through the feed, but in real life. Well, this is one of them, right? Spaces where people are physically around each other. One of my favorite political thinkers, Jedediah Purdy is his name. He defined politics as the process of, in his words, finding terms of alliance for people who need one another and are in one another's way, which I think is a great way to think about what goes on in a city. We need each other, and sometimes we're in each other's way. And navigating that, negotiating that, that's the stuff of politics and policy at its best. And the more you do that with goodwill, I think the more you can earn trust. The last thing I'll say is transparency. And here I'm looking a little more at the Congresswoman, the excellent work she's doing on the Oversight Committee. And yeah, that definitely deserves a hand. Because every day we're learning something that is not great about how things are working in Washington. From the notorious Epstein files to information just out about how the personal information of Americans may have been taken on thumb drives by people working for the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which is just the latest tragic example of the difference between a Department of Government Efficiency that we could have had, which I think anybody who's worked in government would welcome in theory, and the one we actually got, which had nothing to do with government efficiency, right? And so many other things where the first step toward trust is to get the facts out. And so I want to applaud the work that you're doing, because at the federal level, which has a much longer way to go than the local level in establishing healthier trust, the first step is just to know what's out there.
I want to turn to a topic that you and I are both very passionate about, this idea from Rust Belt to reinvention. I remember reading about you in your first campaign when I was thinking about running for mayor in 2019 and 2020, and kind of your vision of how we reimagine how the world and the nation thought about the Rust Belt in Midwest cities. And, you know, South Bend has certainly seen a transformation under your leadership and the foundation that you've laid. And in Cleveland, you know, we obviously have a similar story. We were once considered America's first Silicon Valley, as John D. Rockefeller got to start here.
That's right.
Standard Oil was created right here in Cleveland, Ohio. We once had Millionaires Row down on Euclid Avenue. And we really powered America's first industrial revolution. And as we're seeing the economy change right now, where really in the early 2000s, it was really dominated by the coast, from Silicon Valley to New York City to Boston. Now with the trends of reshoring and onshoring, I think there's a moment here where the Midwest, Ohio, and I want to make for damn sure Cleveland, we're going to build things right in this country again, and I want Cleveland to lead the way. What's your viewpoint on what we as mayors can do to drive America's industrial policy for the future?
Well, first of all, I share your passion for this region and the industrial Midwest becoming a powerhouse for the future. I think that it'll look different from before, and that's okay. And that was the first task when I became mayor of South Bend, was to shed the nostalgia that was very tempting, so that when we look back at our past, for here it's things like Standard Oil, it was Studebaker car company. It's as big as the big three today, until that last Studebaker rolled off the line in 1963. And that was such a traumatic fact that it was still the dominant fact about our city when I was born there, decades after that happened, and when I became mayor decades later still. I think our generation may have actually benefited from not having been around to see the heyday, because I think if we actually knew what it was like, we would run the risk of being able to imagine nothing but how do we get back to that. Now, instead, what we can do is we can look back at those innovators and leaders of the past and notice that what was really special about them was how focused they were on the future, and try to imbibe that spirit. And in very practical terms, as I look to the future, I think we have some things around here that a lot of other people around the country and around the world are going to wish they had. First of all, there is that latent memory, awareness, habit, let's call it muscle memory, of how to build things and do things that are real and big and hard. Secondly, water. You need water. You need water to live. You need water to function. Industry needs water. Data centers, we are learning, need water, and the stewardship of that water that goes into them is going to be a very important issue that has to be managed wisely. The point is, the Great Lakes are only going to grow in importance as both the industrial profile of the country and the nature of our climate continue to shift. And we need to be prepared for that and positioned for that, which partly means preserving the water that is this incredible resource that we have and its quality. I also think there is a likelihood that we don't really know what's coming with artificial intelligence, right? But there's a chance, a high chance, I think, that it will actually elevate the importance of what we would think of as blue-collar work and care work, two forms of work that have been undervalued, and lift up, in relative terms, the importance of that. I mean, think of all the blue-collar workers from our region who were told to become computer programmers a couple decades ago. Yeah. And now think about all the jobs in computer programming that are being disrupted. So to me, all of that positions us, well, it's not just going to come our way, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be obvious. It's too soon now to know all the shape it'll take, but we know is if you have the fundamentals, you make sure it's a livable place, an affordable, and I'd love to hear a little more about the progress happening with your economic vision here, because I know it's about affordability, quality of life, pulling those things together. That's the platform that you can build all those things on, right?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we inherited 4 years ago when I took office was questions of how Cleveland could come back from the pandemic. I think every mayor in America was dealing with this question of what does our post-pandemic recovery look like? And we uncovered a few things. I think number one, we were losing a lot of jobs, not just from other states across the country, but to our suburban peers, whether it's in Solon, Hudson, Twinsburg, for a couple reasons. Number one, we didn't have the talent to take the jobs that were being created in advanced manufacturing, whether it's polymers or biotech, et cetera. But the second biggest pain point we had was we didn't have the land shovel ready to go to attract and retain the jobs of the future. Now, as many folks in this room knows, Cleveland was once a walk-to-work city. You know, both sets of my grandparents came up to Cleveland to work in the auto plants and the steel mills. And for us to compete as a city and as a region, we needed to put capital to work to have shovel-ready job sites for the future. So because of the American Rescue Plan, through our partnership with City Council, and I see Councilwoman Stephanie House-Jones here. Thank you for your leadership, Councilwoman Stephanie House-Jones. Let's give her a round of applause if we can. The largest federal investment that we had with ARPA was putting $50 million of capital to work to create the Site Readiness Fund for Good Jobs. We're working with the Cleveland Foundation right now to raise another $50 million to make this a $100 million fund. The goal is to convert 1,000 acres of brownfield land, predominantly in the east side of Cleveland, to make it shovel-ready job sites for the future. And already, and in just several years, we have nearly 400 acres under contract to redevelop to create those jobs for the future. That's a big thing. Second thing I would say is housing. I was talking to my team at City Hall, and we did some back-of-the-envelope analysis. We have about a $2 billion home rehab problem in Cleveland. $2 billion. We have an aging housing stock. We have still a big problem with growing wages so that our residents can afford to repair their homes. And unfortunately, too many of our residents have too much a month and not enough money, right, to make ends meet to keep up with their homes. And so we are working aggressively to help lead the nation in innovative housing solutions. So one of the things we're doing, connecting it to our Site Readiness Fund for Good Jobs, is we're in the process of luring one of the best modular housing manufacturers to Cleveland to put people to work, but also to rapidly scale the production of modular housing. And I'll also say, as you know, our balance sheets are very limited as mayors. And so we're working with Key Bank, our hometown bank, and List to raise a $100 million housing investment fund to create 3,000 more units of affordable and workforce housing through that fund. And so we needed to make the long-term strategic bets and investments to build a strong foundation in the first term. And in the second term, as we see the American economy take shape, as we see the growing market trend and drive around the reindustrialization of the American economy, the Cleveland era is all about how can Cleveland lead the nation in America's industrial revival, putting people to work, leveraging our legacy history and advanced manufacturing, and being a model for the nation of how to rebuild, particularly in hard times.
That's exactly how I would be. I'm not surprised, but that's exactly how I would be hoping to see things moving forward, because you need that platform coupled with a readiness for some things that we don't know how they're going to turn out, but when you have those pieces ready. I'm also, by the way, very excited to see how things unfold with this modular housing work that's going on, because we need to find, look, some of the obstacles to affordable housing are administrative, bureaucratic, legal. They need to be worked out on paper. But some of them, a bit like healthcare, we just got to figure out how to deliver it for less money. Yeah. And seeing how that takes shape, I think, could be a very compelling part of how the next decade's problem solving unfolds.
You mentioned something earlier, and I know it's keeping me up at night. I know it's keeping a lot of my fellow mayors up at night. The AI boom is here, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Are we doing enough as a country to protect American workers, and do we have the right game plan on how to manage and leverage AI and its impacts?
I think we're clearly underprepared. I think one of two things is going to happen in terms of I'm not talking about the technology, the technical parts of it. That's one conversation. I'm talking about the political economy of it. That's the part I think we need to be paying more attention to. This is not just a tech conversation that tech people who are into tech should be talking about and caring about. This is a conversation that should especially hit home for those of us who live in communities in the industrial Midwest who were on the receiving end of some of the biggest disruptions of the last turn of the wheel. Because one of two things is going to happen. Either AI leads to a shorter work week and more money in your pocket, which would be great, or it leads to even more extreme concentrations of wealth and power than we already have, which is what will happen if we're not proactive. That is not a technology question, it's a policy question. What are we going to do to cut the American people in, to cut workers in on the wealth that's being created? And by the way, when I say that, that's not trying to confiscate or take away something from tech companies. It's recognizing that fair is fair. Remember, the American people literally invented the internet with our tax dollars, right?
DARPA, yeah.
And all these AI models, they all trained on data that we all put out into the world without exactly asking us, right? And all of this enormous amount of wealth, value, is being created. We don't know exactly what scenario is going to unfold, but it is likely that there will be huge changes to the way people work, what jobs are like and what jobs exist in the next very few years. And again, being in the industrial Midwest, I think, puts us in a position to really understand what that could mean. We learned the hard way as a region that you have to be ready for this, that you have to get real resources to help people prepare. And we learned one other thing that I think is missed in the national conversation. And it has to do with how, even if you figure out a new way to replace somebody's income, their job wasn't just a source of income, it was a source of identity.
Yeah.
And again, I know folks around here are not strangers to this concern. It's certainly true where I was growing up. You got somebody who's been a machinist for 17 years, and they can't be a machinist anymore. And the well-intentioned program kind of crunches the numbers and says, well, you're going to be a nurse now. And that's a great job that we need more people in, but the guy's like, no, that's not who I am, that's not what I do. The belonging, the sense of belonging that we get from our work is critically important. And if there is not a healthier sense of belonging available, there are some very unhealthy senses of belonging that are going to come calling. White nationalism found fertile ground in communities that had experienced enormous economic disruption because it was a source of belonging. I actually think the current administration, the vice president in particular, understands the importance of belonging. He's telling a story about belonging. Now, it's mostly in terms of who you get to exclude. So it's not my idea of how to build a story of belonging. But that's what's being peddled, right? Now, there are other ways to find belonging if your professional identity is going through lots of changes that could be more secure and more stable. Many of them, interestingly, actually usually get talked about as in more conservative terms, but this doesn't have to be a conservative thing. Family, nationality, which is not the same thing as nationalism. What I'm talking about is a commitment to and service to the life of this country.
Yeah.
For many people, it's faith. And for many people, it's community, it's the local. The way we belong in our neighborhood or in civic life. I think we could lift that up, build that up, invest in that more. Not only because it's just something that you want to have in a healthy community, but because its importance might rise as our economic day-to-day gets all jumbled up and goes through all kinds of transformations that we can't predict just what they'll look like, but we know they're going to be big and we know they're coming soon. So I believe that we need to not only be preparing in the cold, hard, technical economic sense, we definitely do,
Yeah.
but at that bigger, broader sense, that is one more example where I think mayors and local leaders will be among the best equipped to help respond.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. We certainly have a belonging deficit in America. I was just talking to the newly elected mayor of Omaha, Nebraska, John Ewing. He flipped a seat from Republican to Democrat. He's a former police chief. He's a part of this coalition that I'm looking to build called Blue Cities, Red States, Working for a More United States, where you have common sense, pragmatic, centrist mayors in blue cities and red states who are fighting against preemption, fighting against extreme MAGA governors and extreme MAGA Republican-led legislatures, but still getting stuff done because we don't have any other choice but to get stuff done. And in our conversations, he was talking about all of his accomplishments, but the biggest thing he wanted to do this year was to make 2026 the year of the neighbor.
Very good.
To bring people back together. And when you think about the Midwest, the values that we learned in the Midwest, hard work,
Yes.
we love our country,
Yeah.
we're patriots, we believe in the dignity of work, the dignity of place, we love our sports teams for good or bad. What does America not get about the Midwest? And how can we reshape for the nation what the Midwest means for the American people to gain more credibility, gain more investment, and gain more influence?
Well, I love thinking about that. I didn't realize I was a Midwesterner until I left. Some folks might have had this experience. If anything, I grew up a little uncertain, partly because I had a more progressive mindset in a very conservative state like Indiana. I grew up in a little bit of tension with my surroundings. And, like so many people in our part of the country, I grew up with the message that if you wanted to make something of yourself, get out.
Yeah, same.
I don't remember anybody saying that directly, but I got that message loud and clear growing up. So that's exactly what I did. Got into college on the East Coast, left, and the moment I got there, that was when I realized I was from somewhere. Just the way people talk to each other, the way somebody looked at me if I said hello to them when they were passing by on the sidewalk, the way you naturally would. And
Why are you looking at me?
Yeah.
Don't smile on the subway, by the way.
Right?
They might throw something at you.
So, I think part of it is just a culture of seeing people. Another word that comes to mind is balance. A sense that no one idea, person, institution should have a monopoly on power or on what is right. I think humility. I think we really have a high regard here for leaders who get that. I mean, one other thing you get, sometimes you get told it in family and church, sometimes you just inhale it. But one thing you get in a healthy way growing up is it is made very clear to you at some point, no matter how talented or ambitious you are, that you did not invent yourself when you grow up in the Midwest, right? You were made to understand you were part of a community, that people invested in you. And it makes you more conscious of the responsibilities we have to each other at a moment where I think we really need that. The other thing I think that's really valuable that could be exported or could be kind of developed in places outside the Midwest is because we have very mixed political experiences, right? Mixed political communities, mixed political families, right? We know what it's like to be in dialogue with people we disagree with fiercely and also like. And when all of our political information is coming to us in these feeds, right? The Instagram feed, the Twitter feed, it's all
telling, like, here's somebody I already agree with, doing something I already agree with, and looking good doing it. And then it's, here's this person I already don't like, doing something that reminds me why I don't like them. And it's just those two things, right, that have taken the place of the kind of political dialogue that we're used to having, where you can have more regard for one another, and you're exposed to what somebody else thinks. And sometimes it makes you change your mind, and sometimes it makes you double down. But the point is, you think about it, and you have regard for each other, right? I don't mean to claim that's uniquely Midwestern, but I think we value that particularly highly here. And the last thing I'll say, I think places that have been through tough times, I think we have a readiness to really do what it takes to get to a better place. It's not just grim determination. It's this special sense of reward that comes through seeing a place that maybe had been down and out or counted out, and seeing it rise, right? You feel that kind of militant Midwestern industrial Renaissance energy. We felt it in South Bend. I feel it here. I've certainly seen that in many parts of Michigan. And that's something that I think the whole country might benefit from a dose of.
Before we get to audience questions, I want to get your viewpoint on what's happening abroad. You and I are what I call elder millennials.
I'm glad we finally get to be elders.
Exactly.
Something.
About time, right? About time. I remember being in my computer class freshman year when 9/11 happened. And how that really impacted me and my own lived experience on how we lived in a global world.
Yeah.
I remember being studying abroad in London at the London School of Economics, and I remember sitting across from folks from all over the world talking about the Doha round of free trade and what it meant for farmers in Iowa, but also farmers in India.
Yeah.
And we live in an interconnected world. And having served our country in the armed forces, what's your take on what's happening with the current war in Iran? And what should we be thinking about right now as Americans as we navigate these challenging moments right now with this very complicated foreign policy and this complicated effort in Iran?
Well, when I saw the news that as part of the retaliation to the strikes, missiles were headed to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, I couldn't stop thinking about what it felt like when I was at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which was the stopover before going to Afghanistan. They put you there for a couple days while you get sorted out. I remember being on this dusty, hot, you can imagine, air base where we would sort out our rucksacks and wait for the C-17 Greytail rotator to take us into Bagram Airfield. And I was thinking about all the people who are there right now, the people who are in Kuwait right now, and Saudi, some of whom lost their lives. And it's a illustration of just how widespread the impact of this is in the region. It's not just the troops who were forward deployed in those carrier strike groups that are launching attacks from the Gulf. It's Americans in that whole region. And of course the question is why? Why? You know, when you do put up your right hand and decide that you're going to serve, you're writing a blank check to the United States of America. You don't know who's going to be in charge, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know where history is going to take us and what troops will be needed to do. You just know that you promised to go where you're needed for as long as you're in service. And in my case, it meant when I was my turn going to Afghanistan. And I was there with some people who'd gone to 5 or 6 tours between Iraq and Afghanistan. And you do that hoping, knowing, trusting that whoever's in your chain of command and whatever the politics are of the people at the top of your chain of command, they know one thing, which is that you only ever commit American troops to a war if you have no other choice. And that's just not true today. It's just not true. I have no love for the Ayatollah. When we were out there, and part of my job, we called it military Uber. I was basically a driver. And if we were taking a vehicle outside the wire, sometimes we would be at risk of what were called EFPs, which is a special kind of improvised explosive device that the enemy had been provided by Iran. So even though the conflict was in Afghanistan, the long arm of the Iranian regime was in Iraq and Afghanistan, anywhere an American could be targeted. And I knew that if one of those IEDs were to strike my vehicle, it would probably be a gift of the Ayatollah. I have no love lost for this regime. But what we've done, at least as of today, is overthrown Ayatollah Khamenei and replaced him with literally Ayatollah Khamenei Jr. So the regime has not changed. The region's in chaos. And the most important thing to bear in mind, after thinking about the troops whose lives have been committed to this and some of whom have been lost, is that this war isn't just happening over there, it's happening here. The war is happening here. Anytime people are told, well, we just don't have funding for SNAP, we don't have funding for Medicaid, we don't have funding for infrastructure, we found some funding for those tax cuts for billionaires, but we just don't have funding for these. Meanwhile, $11 billion has already been spent. And that's just what's being spent out of the Treasury. How much money has been spent already by Americans just filling up the gas tank as oil prices go up around $100 a barrel with no plan for what's going to happen next? So the cost of this war is coming down on everybody in America in the form of literally higher prices, probably higher mortgage rates, higher interest rates, and being less safe. And nobody can tell us why.
We certainly miss having a common sense foreign policy in the White House. Thank you, Pete. We got time for a few audience questions, I believe. This comes from Helen Wright. How can an everyday resident get involved in all the amazing work you both are leading? I guess I'll start. As former President Obama once said, the most powerful title in America is the title of citizen. And there is so much opportunity to get involved in Cleveland, from starting a block club across our city to getting involved by mentoring in a local school. That vacant lot you live next to, let us know. We want to give it to you so you can plant a neighborhood garden. There's so many ways that you can be a part of making change without running for office. And we need more folks across the city to raise their voice, to be a part of the solution, and not sit on the couch and not just tweet all day, but be a part of all the great progress we're seeing every single day in Cleveland. Pete?
It's great to hear so many ways for people to be empowered to make a difference in the community. I do think at a time when belonging is going to count more than ever, so many people can build that and develop that in different ways. So I'd urge you to think about what are some of the overlapping circles of belonging that you belong to or that you could build that don't yet exist. I also think it's always important to recognize, and I think this is especially true for young people who don't know if they belong at the table, that local processes create opportunities for that. You know, in order to testify in Congress, you have to be invited or subpoenaed, but like that's how you wind up speaking to Congress, right?
Knock on wood.
A lot of city processes, right? Definitely when I was mayor of the city council, you just show up. Show up and be heard. And I think people sometimes don't realize how many opportunities there are to do that. And where if you have a compelling case to make, you can absolutely shape the way elected officials make a decision. And then in terms of what's going on in our country, I guess what I would point to is that you are more powerful than you think. Much more powerful than certain folks in Washington want you to think. And we've seen many examples of that in terms of policy outcomes, even with the same elected officials. If we were having a different kind of meeting, I'd talk about my vision for how to change some of the people sitting in certain seats. But leaving that aside, leaving elections aside, before you can get to an election, you can get the attention of some of these people. And I'll give you a few examples. We saw some votes start to change on the ACA tax credits. Not as many as I would like, but we saw some Republicans flip their votes and vote with Democrats. It actually passed in the House, just can't get through the Senate GOP, to give people a break on their health care premiums that shot up this year. Why did that happen? It happened because of political pressure. There was one member of Congress who refused to meet his constituents in Wisconsin. And so we said, okay, we'll do it for you. We did a town hall. We had 1,000 people there. And just as the RSVP list for that town hall was growing, he miraculously flipped his vote on that health care bill, which I thought was pretty interesting. Over in Indiana, there was a plan to gerrymander Democratic House members out of existence. They openly talked about a 9-0 map. And the president was strong-arming Republican state senators in Indiana to try to get his way. And there was a movement to say, wait a minute, Indiana doesn't want this. It's a very conservative state, Republican supermajority. This wasn't about party. It's just that we don't want to do this. And we did a rally with hundreds of people filling the State House, just to try to reconnect some of those legislators with their conscience a little bit. And there were phone calls, all these things that sound old-fashioned, showing up at a rally, making phone calls, having your voice heard. And sure enough, a majority of the Republicans, after being personally pressured by none other than the President of the United States in their own party, a majority of the Republicans in the Senate joined with Democrats to reject that highly partisan gerrymander. So some of these results tell me that there is a chance right now to make change that is, I mean, obviously I think that the election process is wildly important, but it's not the only political process in our country. Political pressure works. It can change outcomes. And sometimes things that seem quaint, holding a sign showing there's a march coming up at the end of this month across the country that I think will have an impact on March 28th. Those are also opportunities to make change that collectively, if enough people are part of it, can happen in a way that will change the course of this country.
That's great. Last question from the audience before we have closing comments. From Dan Schinkel. This is a good one. What do you think is the future of the Reconnecting Communities program, especially in, say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, if I have anything to say about it, it will be a robust program that grows. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but since the questioner, Dan, is very knowledgeable about the program, you might be aware. Let me take a step back. So the idea of reconnecting communities, if you haven't followed this, was federal funding for transportation to connect in places where transportation had served to divide. And that's true whether we're talking about, the fact that in the in American English language, we have the expression wrong side of the tracks. Just think about that. Yeah. That tells you everything you need to know, right? About how transportation, whose purpose is to connect, can actually function to divide. And when I was secretary, we sought to, because many times this also happened through federal funding, that took a highway and cut Philadelphia's Chinatown in two, or created effectively a concrete wall between a white neighborhood and a black neighborhood, or made it so that in one New York community, Mount Vernon, which is way up the road from New York, people could get down to Manhattan more easily than they could get to a grocery store in their own city, right? And we used federal dollars to do something about that to make it better. What we found is we started deploying these grants and these dollars across the country, small and big projects. Sometimes it was as simple as putting a footbridge over a road that was cutting up a neighborhood. Sometimes it was as complex as taking a freeway and putting it underground. And then, by the way, something beautiful happens, which is you have newfound land on top of it in the heart of a city, which you don't get to do every day. But what we found is it never made anybody worse off when we made those improvements. And it made a whole lot of people better off. Yeah. For that reason, I believe that vision will persist. Unfortunately, the current administration is not friendly to this vision. They have slowed down some of the projects that were funded in the infrastructure law. And the budget, the same budget bill that had all those tax cuts for billionaires, actually eliminated about more than $2 billion of grants, many of which had already been given out. In fact, just a few hours ago, I was on Front Street in Toledo. In East Toledo, there's this stretch, high crash corridor, dozens of crashes, really kind of divides the community. And so out of that program called Neighborhood Access and Equity, we were able to commit about $28 million to improve that road. That project has been removed. The funding for it was clawed back and redirected to these tax cuts in the last bill. Why? Honestly, probably because the word equity showed up in the name of the program. That's it. Have any of you seen that movie, The Quiet Place? You know what I'm talking about? That sci-fi movie with the aliens? Anybody makes the slightest sound and then the alien gets you? To me, it's kind of like that. You have any grant, any program, it could be a bike lane, it could be an airport improvement, it could be a safety project, it could be a clean energy project, but if there's the slightest whiff of equity, if the word disadvantage shows up somewhere in some paragraph of the grant application, and they see it, boom, they come and they try to eliminate it right away. So obviously that dynamic is going on right now, but the thing about these projects is they're good projects. And a good project will get done. So it will likely require new leadership, but I believe that we will have new leadership. And I believe that new leadership will take that principle of connecting places that had been divided to the next level. And again, when they do, lots of places will become better off and nobody will be worse off.
That's right. Fantastic. Before we wrap up, I can't leave here without talking about a famous Karamu alum, the late, great Langston Hughes. And one of my favorite poems from Langston Hughes is the poem entitled, "Let America Be America Again." And in this poem, Langston Hughes is reflecting on this challenge and battle that he's having with the America that he's living versus the ideals espoused that was founded in our Constitution. And in many ways, that's been our conversation. How do we continue to perfect this union at the local level in great legacy cities like Cleveland? And how do we make sure that we can achieve that reality long term? And that's really the work. And there's a great line in the poem that I want to leave you with before we let Secretary Pete round up our conversation. And it goes like this. Let it be what the dreamers dreamt. That's the work. And every single day, all of us in this room, all of us at City Hall, are really focused on making sure that Cleveland and this Cleveland era is about the people, but a place where the American dream is alive, real, affordable, and within reach. And that's our collective struggle and work together.
Wow. You're going to make me follow Langston Hughes? What I love about that is, we have these ideals that, whether we're talking about the ideals that are encoded in the founding of this nation or the fidelity to those ideals that is called for in great literature and in the searing verse of Langston Hughes, for example. But all of that, it can get academic, it can get abstract. We're throwing around these words, liberty and pursuit of happiness. All these things actually, they cash out somewhere in particular. They matter because they happen to someone in particular in our actual everyday lives. And whether it's the work you're leading in Cleveland or the things I've seen people doing in communities across the country, I see people making sure that for something to go from the dream to something that is, that they make it happen in a particular place and context with the tools that they have. And that, I think, is all of our responsibility. You don't have to be in office, political office, to make that happen. And so as I continue to try to build a picture of what we could have, not just going back to what we had, there's nothing about turning back the clock in it for me, but what we might have. I picture the conversations I'm going to have with my kids. They're twins, 4 years old. The questions are coming. We're at that age. Toddler parents know what I'm talking about. Any parents know what I'm talking about. We're at that age where the questions start coming. And sometimes you don't know what to do. My son wants to know when he's going to die. And just when I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to tell him about that, I'm like, he goes, coyotes are from the same family as dogs. And his brain has just clearly moved on to the next topic because I was taking too long. Why do we have cheeks? That's one of the questions I got recently that I realized, I don't know. I don't know how to explain why we have cheeks. We just do. I don't know. But of course, it won't be that long before questions get very connected to what we all are doing as citizens and what we're doing in our politics and our government right now. And I think it's likely that by the time they're old enough to ask, certainly as they're coming of age, entering the workforce, I'll get questions along the lines of, what were you doing in the 2020s? Like back in the 2020s, when it looked like things were going to go either this way or that way, and it looked to some people like things were already gone, what were you doing? And I want to be able to say all these things that you kids are enjoying now and this great life you have are because we did the right thing back then. Because we saw AI coming, and we had the scar tissue of what had happened in the industrial upheaval of the 90s and the 2000s, so we weren't going to let that happen again. So that's why AI led to a better life and not a worse one for you. We got a hold of that inequality that was exploding, which is why now you live in a more equitable society. We cleaned up the air and water, which is why you don't even have to think about it that much. When you have kids, the reason that you get to pretty much take for granted that you're going to have access to excellent, quality, well-funded public education is that we stepped up when it was time. That we got shaken up the hard way in our comfortable assumptions that there were always going to be more rights and freedoms than before, because we watched them start to be taken away on our watch. So we did what it took to make sure that wasn't the high water mark, which is why you have more rights and freedoms than we did growing up way back in the 1980s, right? That we finally got so fed up with the kind of corruption of our politics that we acted to get money out of our politics, and people said you couldn't do it because they said we couldn't do constitutional amendments anymore. But we knew if our country did prohibition and changed its constitution so you couldn't get a beer, and then changed it back because that was a bad idea, we decided that we had to get to work on an amendment to the Constitution, which, my child, took us 20 years, but we got working on it then in the 2020s, which is why now everybody knows that corporations are not people and money is not the same thing as speech, right? Like, those are the things we could have. Actually, we still have time to make ourselves proud of what we did in the 2020s, but we got to be at it now. And I often think about the words of someone I heard say the smartest thing I've ever heard said about hope, which is that hope is the consequence of action more often than it is the cause of action. And it's why I like surrounding myself with people who are taking action that will generate hope rather than waiting around for hope to come to them.
Well, let's get to work. Thank you all. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Good discussion. That was great. Thank you.
Take it on the road.
Nicely done.